The old mansion on the outskirts of town had always been shrouded in mystery. The locals whispered of strange occurrences and unexplained noises emanating from within its walls. But no one dared to investigate, for fear of what they might find. That was until a group of curious teenagers decided to explore the abandoned mansion. They had heard the stories and wanted to see if they were true. Armed with flashlights and a sense of adventure, they approached the foreboding structure. As they made their way inside, they were immediately struck by the eerie atmosphere. The air was thick with a musty scent, and the walls seemed to creak and groan with each step they took. Despite their initial apprehension, the group pressed on, eager to uncover the secrets of the mansion. As they explored the various rooms, they began to notice strange symbols etched into the walls and floors. They couldn't decipher their meaning, but they sensed an ominous presence lurking in the shadows. Suddenly, they heard a blood-curdling scream coming from one of the upper floors. They rushed to investigate, but found nothing but an empty room. However, they soon realized that they were not alone in the mansion. The ghostly apparition of the woman began to appear before them, haunting them with her mournful cries. They tried to flee, but every door and window was locked tight, trapping them inside the mansion. As the night wore on, the group became increasingly terrified. They were being tormented by malevolent spirits, their every move watched by unseen eyes. One by one, they began to succumb to the terror, disappearing without a trace. The remaining survivors huddled together, praying for a way out of the haunted mansion. But it was too late. The spirits had claimed them as their own, their tormented souls forever trapped within the walls of the mansion. Years later, the mansion still stands, a silent testament to the horrors that occurred within its walls. The townspeople avoid it at all costs, knowing that those who enter never return. And yet, some say that on certain nights, you can still hear the screams of the doomed teenagers echoing through the halls, a warning to all who dare to investigate the haunted mansion.
I was walking home from work late one night when I noticed a car following me. I quickened my pace, but the car kept getting closer. Suddenly, someone grabbed me from behind and pulled me into the car. I tried to scream, but a hand covered my mouth. I was thrown into the trunk of the car and driven to an unknown location. When the trunk finally opened, I found myself in a dimly lit room with concrete walls and a metal door. My captors were two masked men who never spoke, but I could feel their eyes on me at all times. Days turned into weeks, and I lost track of time. I was only given small amounts of food and water, and my captors never spoke a word to me. I began to feel like I was losing my mind, trapped in this windowless room with no way out. But the worst part wasn't the hunger or thirst, or the lack of human interaction. The worst part was the darkness. They never turned on the lights, and so I was left alone in the dark, unable to see my surroundings or even my own hands in front of me. I would have welcomed any form of light, but the darkness only intensified my fear. I could hear the captors moving around outside the door, but they never spoke a word. Sometimes they would play music, but not just any music. It was the same song on repeat, a haunting melody that would get stuck in my head for days. I later found out that it was a form of psychological torture designed to break me down mentally. As the days went on, my hope of ever escaping began to dwindle. I tried to stay strong, but the constant fear and isolation were taking a toll on me. I started to see things in the darkness, shadows moving across the walls, strange figures lurking just beyond my reach. But then, one day, something changed. The captors didn't come to give me food and water like they usually did. Instead, I heard them arguing outside the door. I couldn't make out what they were saying, but I knew that something was different. The door creaked open, and one of the captors walked in. He was alone, and for the first time he wasn't wearing his mask. I could see the fear in his eyes, and I knew that something had gone wrong. "We have to get out of here," he said to me, his voice trembling. "They're coming for us." I didn't know what he meant, but I knew that this was my chance to escape. I got to my feet, using the wall to guide me in the darkness, and followed him out of the room. We ran down a long hallway, and I could hear the sound of gunfire in the distance. The captor was leading me to safety, but I didn't know if I could trust him. For all I knew, this was just another form of torture. We burst through a door, and I was blinded by the sudden flood of light. We were outside, and I could see the stars twinkling above us. But we weren't alone. There were people running around, shouting and firing guns. It was chaos. The captor shoved me toward a car, and I got in. He got in the driver's seat, and we peeled out of there, leaving the gunfire and chaos behind us. I didn't know where we were going, but I didn't care. I was finally free, and I knew that I had survived something that most people never would. I looked out the window, watching as the night sky gave way to the first light of dawn. And even though I was free, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. It wasn't until weeks later, when the news broke about a large-scale kidnapping ring, that I realized just how lucky I had been. My captors had been part of a larger operation, one that had kidnapped and tortured countless people. Most of them had never made it out alive, but I did. And even though the memories of those dark days would stay with me forever, I knew that I had survived for a reason. I was one of the lucky ones, and I would never forget that. I was driving home late one night when I saw a hitchhiker on the side of the road. Normally, I wouldn't stop for a stranger, but something about this person seemed off. They were dressed in ragged clothes, and their face was obscured by a hood. As I drove past them, I could feel their eyes following me, almost as if they were willing me to stop. Against my better judgment, I pulled over and rolled down my window. The hitchhiker leaned in, and their eyes seemed to glow in the darkness. "Can you give me a ride?" they asked, their voice hoarse and raspy. I hesitated for a moment, but then relented. I didn't want to leave them stranded out here in the middle of nowhere. As we drove, the hitchhiker became more and more agitated. They kept fidgeting in their seat, muttering to themselves and glancing nervously out the window. I tried to make small talk, but they weren't interested in conversation. The only thing they wanted to talk about was death and darkness. It was unsettling, to say the least. After what felt like hours, we finally arrived at their destination, an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. "Here," they said, their voice low and ominous. "This is where I need to go." I pulled over and watched as they got out of the car and disappeared into the darkness. As I drove away, a feeling of unease settled over me. But it wasn't until I got home that I realized just how much danger I had been in. I found a piece of paper on my dashboard with a message scrawled in jagged letters. "Thanks for the ride. See you soon." I immediately felt a sense of dread wash over me. I didn't know who this hitchhiker was or what they were capable of, but I knew that I never wanted to see them again. Over the next few days, I became increasingly paranoid. I kept seeing the hitchhiker's face in my mind, and I couldn't shake the feeling that they were watching me. I started locking all the doors and windows at night, and I even went out and bought a gun for protection. And then, one night, I heard a knock at the door. I hesitated for a moment, but then went to answer it. As soon as I opened the door, I realized my mistake. It was the hitchhiker, their eyes still glowing in the darkness. I tried to slam the door shut, but they were too fast. They forced their way inside and attacked me with a knife. I fought back with all my might, but it was no use. In the end, I was overpowered and left bleeding on the floor.